I'm Harper. I came back home to Oregon for my grandfather Charles's 85th birthday. After nearly 3 years apart, I wanted to personally give him a wool scarf I had been knitting every winter night in Austin, where I live and work. He always said his shoulders got cold, and I couldn't let an important birthday like this pass without some warmth. I wasn't expecting a grand party, but I did think someone would at least open the door. When my car pulled up in front of his old two-story wooden house in Forest Hill, the late autumn sun hit the moss-covered roof, and something in my chest tightened. No cars in the driveway, no music, no laughter, just wind threading through dry maple trees. I gently pushed open the rusted screen door, its hinges creaking with a chill that ran down my spine. No one. The air held that old blend of floor polish and dust. I called softly, "Grandpa?" My voice echoed down the hallway. No answer. The living room was unusually neat, like it hadn't been touched in weeks. A red ribbon lay forgotten on the coffee table. A paper party hat, still in its plastic wrap, rested untouched. I rushed into the kitchen, and my heart dropped. He sat facing the window, motionless in his wheelchair. His hands rested on his lap, skin nearly colorless under the dim light. In front of him sat a chocolate birthday cake. Blue frosting melted down one side, nearly collapsed. No candles, no knife, no card. No one. I froze, then ran to him. "Grandpa!" I cried, grabbing his trembling hand. A paper-thin smile appeared on his face. "Harper? You made it? The doctor said to wait for you, but they said they had things to take care of." "Who's they?" I asked, trying to stay calm as I gently wrapped the scarf around his neck. He shook his head. "Charlotte said she'd be back. Soon." "Charlotte?" My cousin. I never trusted her. My eyes landed on a white piece of paper taped crookedly to the fridge. I walked over and ripped it down. The handwriting was rushed, scribbled in black marker. "Withdrew $9,500 from joint account for urgent expenses. Will repay. Don't worry." See, the joint account, the one I co-managed with Grandpa since his health began declining and doctors recommended regular care. I had been sending money every quarter, keeping every receipt, every statement, from over 2,000 miles away, in Austin. I didn't need to check the account, I already knew. I turned back, kneeling beside him. "Grandpa, did Charlotte say anything else?" He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed fixed on the window, voice hoarse but clear. "I told them to wait for you, told them it mattered. But Charlotte said it wasn't convenient." I bit my lip. The feeling of being left out rose in my throat like floodwater. So many birthdays I had missed, not because I wanted to, but because no one ever told me the time or place. This time, I had scheduled the visit back in July. I gave notice, I booked my flight, but clearly my presence was never something they wanted. I stood, walked to the table, and stared at the sagging cake, like a bitter reminder. This party hadn't been forgotten. It was never meant for him. No extra chairs, no gifts, no guests. The house was as quiet as a tomb. I brewed 2 cups of tea, cut the cake into small slices, cleared the table, pulled up a chair beside him, and played his favorite jazz record. The warm sound of a saxophone filled the cold kitchen. He smiled then. A real one this time. "You always know how to make things feel better," he whispered, resting his hand on mine. I nodded, but inside I was burning. They didn't forget me. They deliberately erased me from his life. After cleaning up the remains of a birthday party that was never actually held, I helped my grandfather into the living room and returned to the kitchen to wash the teacups. But something wouldn't settle in me. Something was off. Not just because Charlotte had left him alone, but because of the way he stared out the window. Eyes distant, like he was clinging to a truth slipping from his grasp. Once he dozed off in the armchair, soothed by the gentle hum of jazz, I turned my gaze down the hallway toward his bedroom, the one space always conveniently cropped out in every photo update Charlotte sent to the family group. I hadn't noticed it then, But now, something felt very wrong. I crept toward the door. It wasn't locked. The room was dim, lit only by the pale glow seeping through lace curtains. The scent of mothballs and menthol hit me like a dusty journal cracking open. On the nightstand sat his usual items: a menthol jar, eye drops, and a faded photo frame. I recognized it instantly. It was my mother in her younger years, the picture he'd kept since the day she passed. I moved to the dresser and opened the top drawer. Old handkerchiefs, a few pairs of wool socks, and a dark wooden box. I set it on the bed and lifted the lid. A stack of old photos, most of me as a child, sitting on his lap, wearing paper birthday hats, holding my first violin in 3rd grade. I smiled unconsciously, then froze when I saw a sealed yellow envelope, addressed in firm handwriting. Harper Lynn Robinson. I opened it. Inside was a copy of a property agreement, unsigned by a notary, dated back in 2017. Owner, Charles B. Robinson. Co-owner, Harper L. Robinson. No mention of Charlotte or anyone else. I flipped to the back page, my hand trembling slightly. A note written in fountain pen, still legible despite the years. In case I become too weak. Harper took care of me for 2 years after the first stroke. She deserves this. CR? I collapsed onto the bed. I had never seen this draft. In recent years, Charlotte had taken over all communication with legal contacts, especially after I moved to Texas for work. Why hadn't Grandpa mentioned this? Or had he tried and been blocked? I pulled out my phone and logged into the joint bank account. It was the same account I had contributed to quarterly for his medical care. About $1,500 per transfer. Balance? 0. I reviewed the transaction history. 4 large withdrawals in the last 3 months, each over $2,000. The account name listed, C. Monroe. Charlotte Monroe. She had no legal access to that account. But if Grandpa had grown weak and she had the login? I opened my email app and filtered messages from last year. One from the bank stood out. November. It notified me of a new secondary account controller. I never approved that. I remembered being in Colombia on assignment at the time, barely online. I swallowed hard. The transactions, the missing co-ownership documents, the fact that Grandpa was left alone, none of this was accidental anymore. It was turning into a calculated web of manipulation. I dug deeper into the wooden box. At the bottom was a faded scan, blotchy ink, but the heading still legible: Preliminary Property Transfer Draft. It had been sent from a law office in Medford, a town about a 40-minute drive away. I snapped pictures of everything, then packed the documents into the cloth bag I'd brought with me. Back in the living room, Grandpa was still sleeping, breath steady, his hand twitching softly to the rhythm of the music. I sat beside him, took his hand in mine. "Grandpa," I whispered, "what did they do behind your back?" He didn't answer, but for a moment his eyelids fluttered, like maybe, just maybe, he'd heard me. I tucked the blanket back over him gently, but my heart wouldn't settle. Something much bigger was being hidden, and I wasn't going anywhere until I uncovered every layer of dust they had deliberately piled onto his life and onto the truth that was rightfully mine. That afternoon, while folding Grandpa's blanket, I heard a small delivery truck stop at the front gate. A courier in a red jacket handed me a parcel. No return address. Inside was a glossy flyer, printed in vibrant colors with a gold-stamped headline, honoring the family legacy, Charles B. Robinson's 85th birthday celebration. Location, Pine Ridge Hall, Sapphire Room. Time, 12 p.m. today. I checked the clock. It was 2:17 p.m. A chill ran down my spine. The party had already happened, and neither I, nor, more importantly, Grandpa, had been there. I turned over the flyer. There was Brett, my cousin, wearing a black suit, raising a glass of champagne. Charlotte stood beside him, pearl necklace on, wearing that smile she always saved for staged moments. The backdrop behind them read, "Bonded by family, strength in kinship." I clenched my jaw. Grandpa had spent the day in his wheelchair, completely alone, while those sharing his blood used his name to decorate a fabricated story. I immediately opened Facebook. Brett's page featured an entire photo album. Beautiful celebration today. We're so grateful for Dad and his lifelong sacrifices. Over 200 likes. Endless praise-filled comments. Brett, so wonderful to see you taking such great care of your father. Now this is what a loving family looks like. I tightened my grip on the phone. They hadn't just excluded Grandpa from his own birthday. They were rewriting history, posing for photos with hollow words and building a reputation that never belonged to them. I turned on screen recording, capturing the entire profile, the album, the comments. Then I opened my Finance Manager app and exported the latest 3 months of the joint account statements. Every transaction was traceable. Brett had paid Pine Ridge Hall using Grandpa's linked card. Then came the vendor invoices. Florist Creations Premium Event Package. Catering for 75 guests. True image photography, full family session contract. I backed everything up, created a new folder on my computer named The Truth About Birthday 85. But what hit me the hardest was another photo, tagged by one of Charlotte's friends. In it, Charlotte stood addressing the crowd, hand over her chest, spotlight glowing overhead. Behind her, a large screen displayed a photo of Grandpa. An old photo, clearly one I had taken just after his knee surgery recovery. They had used his image to draw tears from strangers. But the man himself had been left behind with a melting cake and a taped-up withdrawal note on the fridge. I couldn't sit still any longer. I grabbed my camera, went to Grandpa's room, and whispered, "Grandpa, I need to take a few pictures so people can see what really happened." He didn't answer, but his eyes blinked slowly as if he understood. I photographed him sitting in his wheelchair, scarf draped across his shoulders, the untouched birthday cake in front of him. I didn't adjust the lighting. I wanted people to see reality, the kind of neglect that couldn't be denied. That night, once Grandpa was sound asleep, I revisited the old recordings from phone calls with Charlotte. One, dated August 3rd, stood out. She'd said, "October won't be anything special this year. He's getting weak. We didn't think it was worth planning anything." But now I knew. They had planned something, just not for him. I created a subfolder, Recordings, Callousness, and saved the audio file. The pieces came together quietly, photos, invoices, two-faced conversations. They all pointed to one truth. Their public image was built on Grandpa's silence and my absence. Night had fallen. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a warm yellow light casting shadows over the stack of documents in front of me, evidence layered thick, when there was a knock at the door. Soft and hesitant. I glanced through the small side window. A tall, slender figure stood quietly in the mist, wearing a gray hoodie. I cracked the door open just enough to see his face. Lucas, Charlotte's only son. 17 years old, always silent during family gatherings. "Lucas?" I frowned. "Why are you here this late?" He lowered his head, hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Mom doesn't know I came." I opened the door wider. He stepped in, smelling of cheap soap and early fall rain. Without a word, he pulled his phone from his pocket and placed it on the table. His fingers swiped quickly, stopping on a series of screenshots. "I didn't know who else to tell," he whispered. "But what they're doing, it's not right. They told me to unfriend you, said you couldn't be trusted. But yesterday, I heard them talking in the car." I stared at the screen. A group chat titled Team C&B Priority Handling. Members included Charlotte, Brett, and a few names I didn't recognize. The messages were clear. Charlotte, "Harper's snooping. Don't tell her anything else." Brett, "Just keep Grandpa away from any lawyers. She doesn't have valid paperwork." Unknown, "Let her keep playing the devoted granddaughter. We'll finalize things later." My chest tightened. Anger didn't rise like fire. It froze into something cold that seeped into my bones. Lucas looked down, silent. "They don't know I saved the screenshots, but I just don't think your grandpa deserves to be left like that." I rested a hand gently on his shoulder. "Thank you for being brave. I won't let them hurt him anymore." After Lucas left, I locked the door tightly and returned to the table. I pulled out my laptop and filed every screenshot into a new folder. Harper Exclusion Plan. Each file got a timestamp. Then I opened my contacts list, scrolling until I found a name I hadn't called in years, Morris Kaplan, Grandpa's longtime attorney since I was in college. He'd once helped me draft Grandpa's remote healthcare proxy. The call rang only twice. Harper? His voice was still low and steady. I thought you moved permanently to Texas. I came back to find the truth, I said. Do you still have Grandpa's legal documents? You're calling at the right time. He paused. 4 years ago, someone claimed you waived your inheritance rights and signed a release form. It was signed at Brett Carson's law office. I went still. I never signed anything. I figured, he said, slower now. The signature on the original document didn't match the ones on your older files. They only sent a fax. Never let me view the original. But I still have the last valid will, your name's on it, as co-beneficiary with your grandfather. It felt like someone had snapped me awake from a deep coma. Can you send me a copy? I'll scan and send it within the hour. The call ended. I sat frozen for a few seconds, then sprang into action. I opened the security camera app connected to Grandpa's home system, the one I'd installed last year so I could monitor him while away. Luckily, it was still running. I searched the footage from the morning Brett left Grandpa alone with that melting cake. Brett entered at 9:14 a.m. alongside a man carrying a leather briefcase, likely a notary. They went into the living room, no audio, but the video was clear. A thick folder was set on the table, and Grandpa, sitting in his chair, remained still. At minute 7, the man slid a document toward Grandpa, then physically guided his hand onto the paper. I couldn't see if he signed, but the gesture, it couldn't be ignored. I saved the video and named the file, Forsyth signing September 11th, 2023. The screen lit up again. Email from Mr. Kaplan. Subject, Last Valid Will, Charles B. Robinson. I opened the file. The notarized will was dated April 14th, 2019. The last line read, To Harper L. Robinson, who cared for me and stood by me when no one else did. I leave full ownership of the property at 174 East Pine Street, including all real estate value and belongings. I exhaled, not in relief, but in razor-sharp focus. The next afternoon, as I was resetting Grandpa's dining table, the doorbell rang. Not the tentative kind, like Lucas's the night before, but a sharp, assertive tone, as if the person pressing it was declaring authority. I peeked through the curtain. Brett stood on the front step, holding a cake box from Sweet Haven, the bakery Grandpa used to love a decade ago. Next to him was Charlotte, wearing a fitted pastel dress, bold red lipstick, and carrying a paper bag with a bank logo. I opened the door, blocking the entry. Thought you two were busy planning a party, I said, my eyes locked on Charlotte's hand. We're just here to make amends, she replied quickly, smile forced, eyes indifferent. Brought cake, came to visit Grandpa, and we figured it'd be a good time to handle a few documents. What kind of documents? Brett cut in smoothly. Just some asset paperwork. Everyone's on board. I tilted my head. Everyone? Are you speaking on Grandpa's behalf now? Before they could answer, Grandpa's voice called faintly from the living room. Who is it, Harper? Just 2 background actors, Grandpa, I called back. They can come in, but the performance ends in 30 minutes. Opened the door. They walked in, both still wearing those 2 perfect smiles. Charlotte set her bag on the table and pulled out a thick stack of documents along with an expensive pen. We just need Grandpa to sign here, she said sweetly. That way the house is protected, no legal messes later. I raised an eyebrow. Reverse mortgage? Brett nodded. It'll give him more financial comfort. Comfort funded by what? Our company's covering it, he replied. Charlotte will be listed as the point of contact. I didn't answer. I simply reached for my phone and tapped on the voice recording app. Fine, I said, but Grandpa needs a legal representative. I'm calling our attorney. I stepped into the other room and opened FaceTime. Dana, an old friend, now an elder law attorney in Oregon, answered on the first ring. I'm here, she said. What's going on? They brought a reverse mortgage contract, I explain, claiming Grandpa agreed. I need you listening. I turned the camera toward the table. Charlotte stiffened. Are you defending yourself? We bring in a lawyer, she snapped. Because this property isn't your backyard to fence off whenever you feel like it. Just then, a woman in a navy blue blazer walked in, holding a leather case. I'm Susan, the notary. I was scheduled by Brett Carson. I nodded and pulled out a chair. Hello, Miss Susan. Have you verified the signer's mental capacity yet? Susan blinked. I was told everything was already cleared. Dana spoke up clearly. I'm Dana Walsh, licensed elder law attorney. I recommend postponing this signing until Charles Robinson's cognitive capacity is independently confirmed. Susan looked rattled. I'll need to call my office. I opened a file folder on the table. Here's Grandpa's notarized will stating I, Harper, am the full legal heir. And here, I pulled out another sheet, is a medical report from his neurologist, issued 2 weeks ago, diagnosing cognitive decline. Charlotte jumped up. You're making this up. I silently opened my tablet and played the security camera footage from 2 days ago. Brett physically guiding Grandpa's hand to sign a document. Charlotte went pale. Brett's jaw clenched. You filmed that? The camera was installed in Grandpa's house, I replied calmly. Not a public space. You should be glad I kept the audio. Susan stood, gathering her things. I can't continue with this session. There's a clear conflict of interest. She exited the house, leaving behind a suffocating silence. Charlotte threw the papers onto the table. You think you're smarter than us. I didn't respond. I simply said quietly, I don't need to be smart. I just need to stop being silent. Brett grabbed Charlotte's arm and turned to leave. At the door, he looked back. You haven't won. I smiled, steady. I don't need to win. I just need to make sure Grandpa doesn't lose. As the door closed behind them, Grandpa stirred slightly. Did you say something, sweetheart? I took his hand and gently replied, I said, no one's going to trick you ever again. He smiled, a soft, fleeting smile that might have gone unnoticed if I hadn't been watching. But I saw it, and I won't forget it. 3 days after the confrontation with Charlotte and Brett, I received a text from an unknown number. It read simply, the family would like to sit down and talk. No arguing, no lawyers. Sunday, 10 a.m. at Brett's house. No name, no emoji, the kind of message that felt more like a billing notice than an invitation. I arrived 10 minutes early, not because I was eager, but because I wanted them to see I was in control. Brett's house looked like something straight off the cover of Home and Hearth. Cinnamon-scented candles, a tray of freshly baked cookies, a glass pitcher of lemon water with thin slices floating inside. Everything was staged to perfection, like they were expecting a welfare inspection. I walked into the living room. Everyone was already there. Charlotte sat rigidly, legs crossed, in a cream blazer without a single wrinkle. Brett stood beside the large TV, remote in hand. The only empty seat was a low chair tucked in the corner, directly under the air vent, clearly meant for me. I sat down. No one spoke for several seconds. Brett smiled, like someone whose loan just got approved. We're here because we're concerned about you, Harper. You seem a bit unstable lately. The family doesn't want you getting tangled in unnecessary legal drama. Charlotte nodded, picking up the thread. I think it would be best if everything were clear. This is a voluntary agreement. You'd relinquish all claims to the estate so you can focus on caring for Grandpa without legal burdens. I'll take care of all expenses. She slid a thick stack of papers toward me. The bold title on top read, Statement of Waiver, Inheritance, Property, and Associated Claims. I looked at the stack, then at them. Charlotte's eyes scanned my face for a reaction. Brett kept a calm posture, like a seasoned negotiator. I quietly opened the cloth bag I'd brought and pulled out a thin envelope. Before I sign anything, I said, you need to hear something. I unlocked my phone and played an audio recording. Grandpa's voice filled the room, raspy but clear, taken from a quiet afternoon we'd spent together. Harper is the only one who never asked me for anything. She just wants me to be okay. I know they're trying to divide the estate. but I've already made my choice. I let the recording play for 45 seconds. Then I turned it off. No one said a word. I laid another folder on the table. The notarized power of attorney Grandpa had signed 6 months ago in front of a nurse and an independent witness. It clearly named me, Harper, as his legal representative for all financial and healthcare decisions. Charlotte opened her mouth to protest, but I added more documents. Bank statements with her signature on unauthorized withdrawals. The event receipt for the secret birthday party. Screenshots of the group chat, plotting to cut me out of the will. Security footage of Brett forcing Grandpa's hand to sign property documents. Brett's jaw tensed, his face flushed red. This proves nothing, you're just spinning it your way. I opened the final folder, a legally amended will stamped by the Medford Law Office. I read the key clause aloud. All real property located at 174 East Pine Street, associated accounts, physical assets, and minor investments shall be transferred to Harper L. Robinson as sole caregiver and rightful heir. Charlotte shot up from her seat. This is invalid. He wasn't of sound mind when he signed. I met her gaze, steady. The document was executed 3 weeks before any cognitive issues were documented, time-stamped, 2 witnesses present, and a full signing video on file. The room thickened with silence. Brett rubbed his temples and backed away from the table. Charlotte avoided my eyes, staring down at the paperwork like she was seeing its weight for the first time. I stood, pushing my chair back toward the corner. I didn't come here to negotiate, I came to notify. And here's the official message. Stop using Grandpa as a prop for your fake image. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need tears. I just needed them to know. My silence was over. And this time, they were the ones who had to sit and listen. I hadn't even left my chair when the door at the back of the living room swung open. A woman in her 50s, wearing a charcoal gray blazer with a silver nameplate that read Marjorie Dent, Clerk, Jackson County Probate Office, stepped inside. All eyes turned toward her. Charlotte flinched. Brett froze in place. I gave Mrs. Dent a small nod, then turned to the others. Perhaps I should clarify, I said calmly. Today's meeting was officially filed as a preliminary civil deposition. Everything said here will be recorded as evidence in an ongoing investigation. Charlotte turned sharply to me, her voice edged. You tricked us into participating in a court proceeding? I didn't need to answer. Mrs. Dent gently pulled out a chair, opened a leather notebook, and began writing. Please continue, she said. I've been taking notes since the will was read. Brett clenched his jaw. This isn't valid. This is my house. And the sight of a suspected coerced property agreement, I responded. The court is very interested in the location where that occurred, Brett. I stood and walked over to the table beside the projector. I'd like to present video evidence, a legal testimony from Charles B. Robinson. I opened my laptop and connected it to the large TV. The room fell completely silent as the footage played. Grandpa sat on a wooden chair on the porch, silver hair soft in the afternoon sun, voice slow but clear. If I ever lose clarity of mind, I want everyone to know one thing. I'm not leaving my home, land, or money to anyone just because they carry the Robinson name. I'm leaving it to someone who understands their worth, not in dollars, but in memory. Harper never treated me like a burden or an asset. She asked what I wanted to eat, not how much money I had. She was the only one who stayed with me without asking for anything in return. A breeze stirred the mic. The screen faded to black. No dramatics, no theatrics. I turned around. Does anyone still want me to sign away my rights? No one answered, but I wasn't finished. I pulled a thick envelope from my bag. One last thing, I said, placing it on the table. Regarding the lake house in Klamath Lake. Charlotte narrowed her eyes. That house was sold. What does that have to do with this? I opened the folder, pulling out a certified copy of the property deed, stamped by the Klamath County Property Tax Office. That's right, I nodded. The house was sold under Charlotte's name shortly after Grandpa's first hospitalization. Sale price $132,000. Buyer, a small real estate firm called Willow Ridge Holdings. I pulled out another document with a company logo in the corner. I'm the founder and CEO of that firm. Brett stepped back, face pale. You? You bought the house? No, I corrected. I reclaimed it. Pay market value, because I knew neither of you would ever let Grandpa keep it. Charlotte sank into her chair, lips pressed white. I laid down a photo. The old vacation home, now renovated into a residence center for retired caregivers and medical workers. A wooden sign hung over the porch. The retreat at Willow Ridge, in memory of Charles B. Robinson. That house was where Grandpa and I fished, ate peanut butter sandwiches under a leaky roof. You sold it to pay off credit cards and put down payments on a boat. No one spoke. Even Mrs. Dent paused her notes, quietly watching me. I gathered the documents and tucked them back into my bag. I didn't come here to destroy anyone, I said, locking eyes with Charlotte, then Brett. I came here to protect Grandpa from the very people who were supposed to protect him. Charlotte stood up and left the room without a word. Brett tried to keep his composure, but I saw it, his hand trembling as he stuffed half-sinned papers into his briefcase. At the door, he turned slightly, as if to say something, then thought better of it. I heard the door slam shut. No goodbyes, no apologies, just the silence of a curtain falling on a staged performance. I turned to Mrs. Dent. I'll email copies of the supporting documents today. She nodded. You did well, Harper, but don't let your guard down. People like them don't walk away easily. I gave a faint smile. I don't expect them to walk away. I just want them to know I'm ready. 2 months after the so-called family meeting meant to bury me, I officially moved in with Grandpa at the lake house in Klamath, a place once sold off like surplus property, but now reborn as the beginning of something more honest, more right. I took down the heavy, dark curtains and threw open every window, letting in the scent of cold lake water and pine. The fake family portraits came off the walls, replaced by real moments. Grandpa fishing in his faded cotton hat, me reading on the porch, Lucas grinning wide during his first campfire. No backdrops, no staging. The ground floor became a communal space, with soft fabricked armchairs, a gas fireplace, and shelves filled with the worn paperbacks Grandpa once loved. Upstairs, I converted 3 bedrooms into guest rooms, not for tourists, but for people like who I used to be. Caregivers, burned-out nurses, children forgotten by their own families. I called it the Retreat at Willow Ridge, a space for those who had given more than they ever received. The wooden sign, hand-carved, hung on the freshly painted white fence with a line beneath it, honoring what no one saw. My grandpa didn't ask many questions, he just nodded every time I explained a new part of the plan. He wasn't strong enough to help much, but each evening I wheeled him out onto the porch where he could watch the lake glow under the setting sun and smile. That smile told me I was on the right path. Word about our little center spread faster than I expected. A short feature ran in the Oregon Sentinel under the Quiet Hearts column. Then a group of retired nurses from Medford reached out. 2 of them asked to stay a week, just to sleep through the night without waking up to emergency alarms. The following week, I received a handwritten letter, steady but slightly shaky. My name is Martin. I invested in Brett Carson's senior living back in 2019. Lost $42,000. No one believed me. But because you spoke up, I got part of it back after the investigation. More than that, I stopped feeling like a fool. Thank you for not staying silent. I kept that letter in a leather-bound journal, along with texts, emails, and notes from others who had been hurt by silence. Not just from others, but their own. From staying small for too long. One evening, late in the month, I headed into the kitchen to bake a cake. Not store-bought, I made it myself. Chocolate with raspberry jam, Grandpa's favorite. As it baked, I heard his wheelchair slowly rolling from the living room toward the porch. I carried the cake out while it was still warm, setting it on the small wooden table outside. The air was crisp. I wrapped a scarf around his shoulders and placed a single candle in the center of the cake. This time, I said, striking a match, the cake won't melt. He looked at the flickering flame, eyes glinting with something deeper than emotion. Relief, like a weight that had hovered over him for years, had finally lifted. Harper, he whispered, you've done more than I ever dared dream. I didn't reply. I cut a slice, placed it on a porcelain plate, then sat beside him, watching the lake reflect a moon as thin as thread. We ate in silence, but it wasn't the silence of distance. It was the stillness of things finally being set right. No more battles, no more rewritten memories. It wasn't revenge, it was justice, and a final slice of birthday cake. At the right time, for the right person, and never forgotten. My story wasn't just about reclaiming property. It was about reclaiming a voice, the truth and dignity for a grandfather once treated as a burden. In a world where reputations can be painted with lies, I chose to stand up, not for revenge, but for justice. And I realized, sometimes the bravest thing isn't forgiving or forgetting, but speaking the truth, even if you stand alone, because silence only empowers the manipulator. What do you think of Harper's story? What would you do in her place? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family and resilience.